Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on, well, a bit of an unusual journey.
Definitely unusual.
We're diving into the writings of Julius Evola, specifically his book, Meditations on the Peaks, mountain climbing as metaphor for the spiritual quest.
Right.
And our mission today, it's really to unpack Evola's quite surprising take on mountain climbing. He sees it as way more than just a sport.
Much more. For him, is a path to self-realization, a critique of modern life, and maybe the most surprising part, a way to access what he calls a higher order of reality.
So, setting the stage for us, this collection, Meditations on the Peaks, where does it come from exactly?
Well, it was gathered and published, actually, with Evola's okay, in late 1973, just months before he passed away in 74.
Okay.
But the writings themselves, they're from articles he published mostly between 1930 and 1942. And fascinatingly, his own climbing, what he called his metaphysical practice, goes back even further to the 1920s. He was writing about it then, too.
So this isn't some abstract philosophy. He lived it. He climbed these mountains.
He really did. It was rooted in his direct experience.
Which brings us, I think, to the core question for this deep dive. What is this inner realization Evola keeps talking about? What does the mountain actually offer, especially as he saw it, in a modern West that's kind of cut itself off from nature and, well, deeper meaning?
That's the crux of it.
Okay, so let's get into Evola's main arguments. Why are mountains more than just rocks and ice for him? He seems to see two big problems with spirituality in the modern world.
Yeah, two main obstacles. On one side, you've got this really abstract, bookish culture. People thinking knowing about things, being intellectual, is the same as, real spiritual depth.
Like confusing the map with the territory.
Exactly. And then, on the other hand, there's this almost obsessive focus on physical activity for its own sake. Sports becoming like a religion, but without the deeper substance.
And Evola says both approaches miss something crucial.
They both miss what he calls the heroic vision of the spirit.
Heroic vision. Okay. So what is true spirituality for him then, if it's not just books or just physical prowess?
Well, for Evola, it's definitely not just theories. It has to be actualized, as he puts it, translated into a feeling inside, a kind of superiority, but experienced in the soul.
And it shows outwardly, too.
Yes, and a noble demeanor, he says, expressed in the body. And that's where mountain climbing comes in. It stops being just a sport and becomes a way to actually do this transformation.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting. He argues that the struggle, the raw effort on the mountain, away from machines, dealing directly with the elements.
Wind, ice, rock.
Exactly. That this direct contact can actually reawaken something he calls a truly spiritual and virile light. It lets you touch primordial forces locked within the body's limbs. But what does that feel like? What's the experience?
This is where he connects with ideas from thinkers like Nietzsche and Simmel, talking about more than living.
More than living.
Yeah, the idea that life at its most intense points can kind of transcend itself. You don't lose yourself, but you enter this incredibly heightened state of awareness where just being becomes this profound affirmation. Anxiety fades, craving stops, and you find this dominating state of calm. Evola saw the mountain climb as offering that exact possibility, a chance for purification, awakening, rebirth of something transcendent.
Wow. Okay, so if that's the ideal, he must have had some strong opinions about how most people approach mountains today. Modern tourism, for instance.
Oh, definitely. He had a very strong critique. He talks about how modern tourism contaminates the mountains.
Contaminates? How so?
Well, it's not just the obvious stuff like, faint-hearted youths bringing city habits, discos and tennis to resorts. He's also critical of people who might have all the gear, seem serious, but still bring materialism and triviality to these silent places.
Like what specifically?
Especially the mania for setting new records, just chasing numbers, not the experience itself. He's very clear. The mountain requires purity and simplicity. It requires asceticism.
Asceticism. So it's more than just avoiding the crowds or not caring about records. What does that asceticism look like?
It's really about tapping into a much older, deeper kind of reverence. The text points out how mountains are universal symbols across ancient traditions: Chinese, Aztec, Greek, Hindu.
Right, seen as homes of the gods, places of power.
Exactly. Seats of the gods, dwelling places of heroes, sites linked to glory and immortality. Think Mount Meru in the Himalayas, Shiva's place of meditation, a symbol of intense purification. For Evola, this isn't just myth. It points to something real, a universal human pull towards transcendence found in high places.
And the idea of height itself is loaded with meaning, isn't it?
Absolutely. The Sanskrit word paradesha, meaning an elevated site, is linked to our word paradise.
Paradise. Interesting connection.
And you see it in myths, too. Heroes in Greek stories disappearing into mountains, or medieval legends like Charlemagne or King Arthur waiting inside a mountain. He sees these as symbols of spiritual transfiguration, like an initiation into a realm beyond death, not just a literal vanishing act.
So how does that ancient idea, the hero finding paradise or transformation in the mountain, connect to someone actually climbing a peak today?
Well, it even connects to Nordic myths. The mountain as Valhalla, Odin's court for fallen heroes. It's pictured like Asgard, a heavenly mountain, shiny, luminous, above the clouds.
A place where heroism and the divine meet.
Precisely. And what's key for Evola is that these ancient symbolic ideas aren't just stories. He believes they point to a real, transformative experience that's still accessible to individuals now, if approached in the right way. It's not just a metaphor for him.
Okay, so if the mountains hold this potential for transformation, how do you actually tap into it? This brings us to what he calls practical metaphysics.
Right, moving from the why to the how.
It sounds almost like a training manual. He thinks the mountain experience specifically fosters certain traits, helps with character formation, especially for what he calls the Aryan-Roman type. Now, that term Aryan-Roman type obviously carries a lot of historical baggage. We need to be really clear about how he uses it, right?
Absolutely vital. It's crucial to understand that for Evola, this isn't about race in the biological or, the horrific political sense of the 20th century. He's talking about an inner type, a spiritual disposition.
Okay, so what defines this inner type for him?
It's about a drive toward self-mastery, discipline, a connection to what he saw as ancient, heroic virtues, and a rejection of modern softness or materialism. He saw the mountain environment as a perfect place, a crucible, to cultivate these qualities.
And he identifies specific qualities, specific elements of form in serious climbers that reflect this.
Yes, 4 main ones. First, he notes a sparsity of words. The mountain teaches silence. Idle chat falls away. Focus turns inward. Actions, gestures, signals become the main communication.
Makes sense. On a dangerous climb, you need clarity, not chatter. What's the second?
Second is inner discipline. This means total control over your reflexes, thinking clearly under pressure, acting with purpose, and crucially, managing your imagination, not letting fear run wild. It's almost asceticism, but applied very practically.
Okay, discipline. Third.
Third is action without spectators. True heroism, for him, doesn't need an audience. It's about the internal act, the joy of being alone with your challenge. Even if you're with others, your partners aren't an audience, they're part of the same striving unit.
Right, a shared purpose, not a performance. And the last one.
Fourth is active solidarity. This is that unique bond you find in a rope team. It's built on absolute trust, shared risk, shared purpose. Very different from everyday camaraderie. He compares it to the bonds forged in war, immediate, unquestioning mutual support.
So silence, discipline, action without audience, solidarity. He also mentions psychic training in the mountains, right? He references Alexander David Neal and Tibetan ascetics. Is he suggesting climbers should become monks?
No, not exactly. But he does see the potential for a kind of inner training that serious climbers might access, even without formal esoteric practice. David Neal's observations of ascetics who could tap into extraordinary endurance, traveling for days without rest. He saw parallels.
How so? In what way?
He talks about the second wind, but he takes it further than just the physical. Evola suggests it's tapping into a deeper, almost inexhaustible source of vital force, and that you can learn to access this consciously, maybe through things like controlling your breath, matching it to your pace.
So it's not just pushing through physical limits.
No, he claims it's more like a spiritual support kicking in for the body. You can lead to this state of tirelessness and intense lucidity. He even suggests it allows completing climbs much faster than usual. It's mental and spiritual power boosting the physical.
That really reframes endurance. Okay, so applying this kind of thinking, how does he see different mountain activities? He makes a really interesting distinction between climbing ascending and skiing descending.
Yes, he unpacks that symbolically. Climbing, for him, is essentially about conquest. It's about overcoming gravity, mastering the ascent through your own body's effort. The peak is the goal. The direction is up.
Makes sense. And skiing?
Skiing's essence is the descent. It's a technique, game, and enjoyment of falling, he says. It takes the natural fear of falling and turns it into exhilaration, into speed.
So why does he connect skiing specifically to the modern spirit? That seems like a leap.
Well, he links it to what he sees as modern obsessions, an intoxication with speed, constant change, acceleration, even a kind of collapsing and falling down energy. He suggests skiing gives this cerebral feeling of control over forces, speed, gravity that aren't really being mastered in the same way as in climbing. It's more like directing a fall rather than achieving an ascent through sheer will and effort. It reflects, for him, a kind of loss of that deliberate upward striving he values.
That's a unique perspective on skiing for sure. But as we said, Evola didn't just think about this stuff, he lived it. Let's talk about some of his own climbs. Which ones really illustrate these ideas for him?
Okay, well, a key one was the northern wall of eastern Luscombe back in 1930. He describes these incredibly dangerous icy slopes. At one point, the ropes were useless.
Just him in the ice?
Exactly. Alone in the middle of the uncompromising icy slope left to our resources, he writes. But then, out of that extreme danger, he describes this automatic, almost supernatural state of security, lack of tiredness, and lucidity taking over.
Wow.
For him, it wasn't just surviving. It proved that facing mortal danger could unlock this deeper, almost primal level of functioning.
Intense clarity born from risk. Okay, what about another one? The Ascent of Mount Langkopfel.
That was a solo climb. Very tough. He talks about feeling this almost automatic impulse urging me on. The descent sounds terrifying, getting lost in fog, total darkness, having to rely purely on instinct until guides miraculously appeared.
And the lesson there?
He felt his body became one thing with the rock, driven by instinctive dexterity and supernormal lucidity. It was about the complete integration of mind, body, and environment, where awareness became almost instinctive beyond normal consciousness.
He also wrote about ice and the spirit, describing very different experiences on glaciers.
Right. On the Ortler Glacier, he had this fleeting sense of an ethereal and immaterial atmosphere. People looked shadowless, weightless, like ancient Greek ideas of spirits, nusamata.
Like touching a different reality?
Almost, yeah.
Yeah.
A glimpse of some pre-material state made accessible by the high mountains.
Yeah.
But then a stark contrast on Weißkugel in what he called the Valley of Damnation. Just dead silence, desert-like solitude, a feeling like the place was stricken with some curse.
So the mountains offered both transcendence and desolation.
Exactly. They hold both potentials.
And then there's the Valley of the Wind. That sounded incredibly raw.
It really does. He describes this unbelievable northern wind, constant, relentless. Just walking became a sheer test of will, not strength, but method, automatism, insensibility, and unshakability.
There's pure tenacity.
Pure tenacity. And then the really striking part is his description of hearing the underwater ice breaking on a frozen lake at night.
What was that like?
A frightening experience that chills one's blood, he says. But it also sparks the awakening of a primordial, marvelous, and frightening sensation that is dormant in very archaic recesses of our nature. It's about confronting nature's raw, terrifying power and finding something deep awakened within you because of it, not despite it.
It seems like each climb, though different, reinforced a similar core idea of transformation through extremity. How did the ascent of Mount Grossglockner in 1934 fit in?
That one had a couple of motivations. One was deliberately choosing a harder route to avoid the crowds, maintaining what he called an aristocratic view of the mountain.
Okay.
And the other was embracing that extreme challenge. He talks about the spiritual aspect of being stuck, suspended in the middle of the wall without any chance of escape.
That sounds terrifying.
It forced, he said, an iron lucidity and absolute control.
Yeah.
And this leads directly to that idea we mentioned earlier, amor fati.
The love of fate.
Yes. Accepting the unavoidable. Trusting what's beyond your control. Finding strength in that acceptance. Grossglockner became, for him, a perfect metaphor for facing life's challenges. Don't fight the inevitable. Find your absolute presence within it.
So these intense personal experiences, he didn't just keep them to himself. He saw connections elsewhere, in art and culture.
Absolutely. He really connected with the work of Nicholas Roerich, the Russian painter known for his Himalayan landscapes.
What did he see in Roerich's paintings?
For Evola, Roerich's art captured something essential. It awakened an ancient sensation of oneself and of things, a space where the physical and the metaphysical, the real and the unreal, begin to merge. He felt Roerich offered a visual way towards something transcendent, a glimpse of the same liberation he sought on the peaks.
And he looked even further back to traditional cultures.
Yes, he examined things like Indo-Tibetan art, specifically monuments called Mak Khatan you find along Himalayan paths.
What are those?
They're sort of pyramid-like structures, and their name means receptacle or support of the offerings. Each level, each step, symbolizes a stage in spiritual development, things like the 4 foundations of mindfulness or the 8-fold path in Buddhism.
Like climbing steps towards enlightenment.
Exactly. Culminating in symbols like the sun, moon, and fire at the top, representing divine energies, awakening. He even saw echoes of this kind of symbolism closer to home in the traditional religiosity of Tyrol, where Christian symbols might be combined with older, solar, or totemic imagery. He felt it pointed to a more direct, robust form of religion, above the usual sentimental or conventional plane.
Interesting. Now, before we wrap up, Evola uses some really powerful, almost mythical language when describing certain landscapes, like the kingdom of the demon of the peaks in the Dolomites. What's that about?
Yeah, his descriptions there are intense. He calls the Dolomite peaks barren, tragic, and elemental forms of the titanic purity, places where the earth itself expressed its surreal and sovereign nature.
Sounds awe-inspiring, but also dangerous.
Very much so. He describes one area, the Plateau of the Pale, as a lunar, immobile, uniform desert. He calls it a base camp of those possessed by the demon of the peaks, and chillingly adds, not all those who leave come back. It underscores the very real, profound risk, spiritual as much as physical, in pushing into these zones.
Which really brings up the question, given these dangers, the hardships, the potential for tragedy he acknowledges, why? Why do people keep seeking these experiences? What is the pull of this demon of the peaks?
Evola admits there's some insanity in all this. But he says there's also a flame that flickers higher than all the small values cherished by ordinary people.
Something beyond the everyday.
Exactly. And he concludes that those who truly face these challenges in return, they carry something that sets them aside as people of another race. Again, meaning an inner transformation, not biological race. They've achieved something that changes them, gives them a different kind of clarity, a purpose maybe, that separates them from the mundane. It's that deep human drive for meaning, for transcendence, pushing past limits, even when the cost is high.
So we've taken quite a journey with Julius Evola today. A deep dive into his idea that mountains are far more than just geology. They're like guardians of a threshold.
An initiatory threshold, yeah. A potential path to spiritual awakening, and maybe even a mirror reflecting society's own spiritual health or lack thereof.
And he believed that the raw, tough nature of the peaks themselves helps cultivate these specific inner qualities: silence, discipline, that amor fati, love of fate.
Right, connecting back to these older, almost heroic or divine ideals.
And these intense, often dangerous experiences, he saw them as a form of purification, an awakening, even a rebirth of something transcendent and divine, leading to what he called an inalienable spiritual conquest.
Which leaves us with a thought, maybe drawing on that quote from René Daumal that Evola liked. The high knows the low, but the low does not know the high. So maybe consider this. What might you discover about yourself if you chose to engage with an experience that pushes you beyond your own comfortable lows? What if you sought out those peaks within yourself?
Yeah, what challenges in your own life, maybe not literal mountains, could become your metaphor, your own climb towards that kind of inalienable spiritual conquest Evola described? Something to think about.